On a quiet road just outside the town of Willow Ridge, Ethan Williams pulled over to help a stranded woman, a decision he didn't think twice about at the time. But that small act of kindness would change everything. Who was the mysterious woman he helped that night? And why, the very next morning, did he find a sleek black SUV parked outside his home, its dark-tinted windows concealing whoever was inside? As Ethan tried to go about his daily life, the silent presence of the SUV continued to shadow him, like a haunting figure. Was he being watched, protected, or warned? Little did he know that, before long, strangers would approach him with an enticing offer, a chance that could change his life forever, but at a mysterious cost. Could he trust them? Or would accepting their offer lead him down a path he could never return from? Join us as we uncover today's story. But before we begin, let us know where you're watching from, and if this story about a journey into the heart of human kindness warms your heart, don't forget to hit that subscribe button to stay tuned for more powerful stories. In the small town of Willow Ridge, folks knew Ethan Williams as the sort of man you could always count on. At 36, he had settled into a life that suited him perfectly. Simple, unassuming, and dedicated to making life a little better for everyone around him. Working as a maintenance technician at Willow Ridge's community center, Ethan had become a familiar face, known for his reliable skills and kind heart. Willow Ridge wasn't a bustling place, but it had a strong sense of community, where people waved at each other on the street, gathered at the local diner for coffee, and shared in one another's joys and struggles. And if anyone ever needed a hand, Ethan was likely the first to show up, usually with a warm smile and a roll of tools. He had a daily routine that brought him contentment, beginning with an early morning coffee on the porch of his modest home just on the town's outskirts. It was a single-story house, filled with memories from childhood, when he'd learned hard work and kindness from his parents. Every morning, as the sun rose, Ethan would sip his coffee and watch the day begin, feeling grateful for the peace and purpose he had found in Willow Ridge. After his morning ritual, he'd drive into town, stopping at Ruth's Cafe for breakfast. Ruth herself, a sprightly woman in her 60s, would always have his usual order, a plate of scrambled eggs and toast, ready, along with the latest town gossip. One evening, as Ethan was driving home along a quiet stretch of country road, his day took an unexpected turn. It was the end of another fulfilling but tiring day, and the sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the fields and winding road. Ethan enjoyed this time alone, with the fading light and open sky easing his mind. But as he rounded a bend, he spotted a silver sedan pulled over on the shoulder, hazard lights blinking in the dim light. He slowed down, squinting to get a better look, and noticed a woman standing next to the car, clearly distressed. Without hesitation, Ethan pulled his truck to the side of the road and got out. He approached the woman, who looked to be in her late 20s, her blonde hair pulled back and her face showing equal parts frustration and relief as he approached. Her professional attire, a pencil skirt and blouse, was slightly rumpled, hinting at the ordeal she'd been through with the flat tire. "Evening," Ethan called out with a reassuring tone. "Looks like you could use a hand." The woman, who introduced herself as Lydia Collins, exhaled with obvious relief. "Yes, please. I can't believe I got a flat out here, and I've never changed one in my life." Ethan nodded, giving her a friendly smile as he assessed the situation. "No problem at all, Lydia. Let's get you back on the road." She watched, still a bit anxious but grateful, as he knelt down and set to work. The tire was completely flat, and it looked like she'd driven on it a while before realizing it. Ethan worked efficiently, raising the car with the jack and loosening the lug nuts with ease. As he worked, Lydia hovered nearby, fidgeting slightly and glancing around, as if expecting something or someone. Ethan couldn't help but notice her nervousness. She seemed not only grateful but also uneasy. He dismissed the thought for a moment, focusing instead on the task at hand. Still, it was unusual for people to act so jumpy out here in the middle of nowhere. But people had their own reasons for feeling nervous, he thought, and it wasn't his place to pry. "Are you from around here?" he asked casually, hoping to ease her nerves. She shook her head, offering a weak smile. "No, I just moved here a couple of months ago for work. I'm still trying to get used to these country roads, I guess." She chuckled softly, the sound a mix of nervousness and embarrassment. Ethan nodded, giving her a reassuring look. Yeah, these roads can be tricky if you're not familiar with them. But you'll find folks around here are friendly, always ready to help. In a few minutes, he had the spare tire securely in place. He lowered the car back down, tightened the lug nuts to ensure they were secure, and wiped his hands on a rag he kept in his truck. "There you go," he said with a satisfied smile. "Just make sure you get that tire fixed as soon as possible. The spare will get you to town, but it's not meant for long drives." Lydia looked at him, her eyes reflecting a mix of gratitude and something deeper that Ethan couldn't quite read. "Thank you so much, Ethan. I really don't know what I would have done if you hadn't stopped." Ethan simply shrugged. "It's no trouble at all. Just glad I happened to be passing by." As she reached into her purse, she pulled out a small stack of bills. "Please take this. I insist." But Ethan shook his head, raising his hand in polite refusal. "No, thank you. I was just lending a hand. Helping out someone in need is all the thanks I need." She hesitated, clearly surprised by his refusal. "Are you sure? It's really the least I can do." Ethan smiled warmly, his expression gentle but firm. "I'm sure. You just drive safe now, and keep an eye on that tire." For a moment, Lydia looked at him as though trying to figure out what kind of person would turn down easy money. Finally, she slipped the cash back into her purse, a look of admiration softening her features. "Thank you, Ethan. I won't forget this." He nodded, watching as she got back into her car and started the engine. Just before driving off, she cast him one last look, her expression filled with both gratitude and something else he couldn't quite place. Then she drove off, the taillights fading into the distance as the evening grew darker. As Ethan climbed back into his truck, he thought about the encounter. It wasn't unusual for him to help people. He did it all the time. But something about Lydia's reaction had felt different. Her nervousness, her quick glances around, and that look she gave him just before leaving. It all left him with a sense of unease that he couldn't quite shake. He shrugged it off, telling himself that people often had their own worries and fears, especially those new to the area. Besides, he'd done his good deed for the day, and that was enough for him. Driving home, Ethan tried to put the encounter out of his mind, focusing instead on the peace of the evening. The sun had completely set, and a quiet calm settled over the landscape. But despite the calm, a lingering thought stayed with him, a feeling that this small act of kindness might somehow lead to something more, a chain of events he could never anticipate. As he pulled into his driveway, Ethan took a deep breath, grateful for another day of helping others. Little did he know, though, that this particular good deed would be the first step in a journey that would change his life in ways he could never imagine. The next morning, Ethan Williams woke up to the familiar sound of birds chirping outside his window, sunlight gently filtering through his curtains. He stretched, savoring the quiet peace that came with the start of each day in Willow Ridge. It was a morning like any other, or at least, that's what he thought at first. After making his usual cup of coffee, Ethan sat by the kitchen window, looking out at the quiet street as he sipped. But as he gazed out, something unusual caught his eye. A black SUV, sleek and polished, parked at the curb just a few houses down. He didn't recognize it, and it stood out starkly in Willow Ridge, a town where people generally drove older, more modest vehicles. Ethan's initial thought was that it might belong to a visitor, but as he kept glancing at it, he noticed that it hadn't moved, and there was no one in sight who seemed to belong to it. The tinted windows made it impossible to see inside, and that small detail nagged at him. Shaking off the feeling, he turned his attention back to his coffee. It was probably nothing, he told himself, just an odd coincidence. People occasionally came to Willow Ridge for work or to visit relatives. He brushed it off and continued with his morning routine, pushing the SUV out of his mind. Later that day, Ethan headed to work at the community center. His day unfolded like any other, fixing broken shelves, repairing a leaking faucet, helping out with a community gathering scheduled for the weekend. Ethan loved the familiarity of these tasks, finding fulfillment in the little ways he could make life easier for others. But as the day came to a close, something strange happened. As Ethan left the community center and walked to his truck, he saw that same black SUV parked a few spaces down. A chill ran down his spine as he remembered the way it had been sitting outside his house that morning. He glanced around the parking lot, but again, there was no one nearby who looked like they belonged to it. He stared at the vehicle for a few seconds, a prickling sense of unease creeping up his neck. Deciding not to dwell on it, Ethan climbed into his truck and started the engine. As he pulled out of the lot, he checked his rearview mirror. The SUV remained where it was, unmoving, but the feeling of being watched lingered with him throughout his drive home. The next morning, Ethan woke up and, like clockwork, poured himself a fresh cup of coffee and took his usual place by the window. To his surprise, the black SUV was back, parked in nearly the exact same spot as the day before. This time, he felt a strong, unsettling suspicion. Why was it there again? Was it just a coincidence? Or was someone watching him? As he went about his day, he tried to focus on his work, but his mind kept drifting back to that SUV. He found himself glancing over his shoulder more often than usual, scanning the streets for any sign of it. He felt a sense of paranoia building, which wasn't like him. He had always been a calm and easygoing person, someone who believed in the goodness of others. But this lingering presence was starting to wear on him. That evening, as he left work and walked to his truck, he was almost expecting to see the SUV again. Sure enough, it was there, parked just a little way down the street, partially hidden by the shadows. Ethan took a steadying breath, trying to quell the anxiety that was rising within him. He climbed into his truck and started driving, keeping an eye on his mirrors. And then he saw it. The SUV pulled out and began following him at a distance. He felt his heartbeat quicken. He tried to tell himself that it was just heading in the same direction, but after a few turns, it became clear. It was following him. The SUV kept its distance, never getting too close, but it mirrored every turn he made, every lane change, as though it was deliberately trying to stay unnoticed. In an attempt to shake it off, Ethan took an unfamiliar route home, making several detours through quiet back streets and looping through neighborhoods he didn't usually pass by. The SUV continued to follow, never closing the gap but never falling too far behind. Finally, after nearly 20 minutes of this silent pursuit, Ethan turned down a narrow alley and parked his truck, turning off his lights. He watched in his rearview mirror, hoping the SUV would pass by. After a few tense moments, it did indeed drive past, moving slowly as if the driver was searching for him. Ethan held his breath until it was gone, his grip tight on the steering wheel. Once he was sure it was safe, he took a deep breath and drove the rest of the way home, his mind racing. He had no enemies that he knew of, no debts or unresolved issues that might warrant this kind of attention. Why would anyone be interested in him? The next few days passed in a tense pattern. Every morning, the SUV would appear somewhere near his home, sometimes parked across the street, other times a few houses down. Every time he saw it, the same questions gnawed at him, and every evening it would reappear, lurking around his workplace or along the route home. Ethan grew accustomed to taking detours and trying to lose the SUV, but it followed him with unnerving persistence. One morning, he decided he had had enough. After catching sight of the SUV parked outside once more, Ethan left his house and approached it directly. His heart was pounding, but he masked his anxiety with a determined look. He strode up to the SUV, but as he reached it, the driver's side window rolled up, and the vehicle immediately pulled away, leaving him standing alone in the street, staring after it. From then on, Ethan kept his guard up. He changed his routines, trying different routes and varying his schedule. He even started parking his truck in a different spot every day, hoping that he could throw off whoever was tracking him. But no matter what he did, the SUV always seemed to find him. After a week of this constant surveillance, Ethan's initial suspicion had grown into something much darker. He was starting to feel trapped, hunted even. He could no longer shake the feeling that something bigger was at play, something that he couldn't see or understand. The SUV had become a symbol of fear, a looming presence that had disrupted his once peaceful life. One evening, he found himself sitting alone in his kitchen, staring at the clock as it ticked away the minutes. He hadn't slept well in days, and the exhaustion was starting to weigh on him. As he took a deep breath, he realized he needed to find out who was behind this and why they were following him. He couldn't keep living under this shadow, with the constant dread that followed him everywhere. He considered his options, wondering if he should involve the local authorities. But he quickly dismissed the thought. What would he tell them? That a car had been following him? In a small town like Willow Ridge, he knew that without solid proof, he'd likely be met with skepticism. As he sat there, he resolved to confront this mystery head-on. The SUV had gone from a curious detail in his quiet life to a constant, unsettling presence, and he needed answers. Little did he know, though, that the answers would come soon enough, and that they would change everything. Ethan woke up that morning with an unusual sense of resolve. For days now, the black SUV had followed him, lurking in the shadows of his otherwise peaceful life in Willow Ridge. The constant surveillance had frayed his nerves and disrupted his usual routines. He was tired, frustrated, and more than a little bit anxious, but he had decided that today, he'd put an end to the mystery. He would confront whoever was behind it. As he sat on his porch, sipping his morning coffee and thinking through his plan, he noticed something unusual. Parked neatly at the curb wasn't just the familiar black SUV. It was joined by a sleek, dark sedan. Both vehicles looked out of place in the quiet neighborhood, where modest, well-worn cars lined the streets. His heart quickened as he watched two men step out of the sedan and head toward his house. Ethan set his coffee down, standing up as the men approached. They looked nothing like the typical residents of Willow Ridge. The older man, tall and graying at the temples, wore an impeccably tailored suit. His companion, slightly younger with a stern expression, was similarly dressed, giving off an aura of professionalism and authority. "Good morning, Mr. Williams," the older man greeted, his tone polite but formal. "My name is James Barlow, and this is my associate, Mr. Cole. We're here on behalf of the Parker family." Ethan felt a slight chill at the mention of the name, recalling the young woman he'd helped on the roadside. Lydia? Now he remembered. She'd introduced herself as Lydia Parker. A wealthy family, then, which explained the sleek cars and formality of his visitors. Still, he couldn't shake the sense that there was more to this than a simple thank you. "Mr. Barlow, Mr. Cole," Ethan acknowledged, crossing his arms. "Mind telling me why you've been following me around in that SUV?" Barlow nodded, as if he'd expected the question. "We apologize for any discomfort we've caused you, Mr. Williams. We had no intention of alarming you. We simply wanted to ensure that we could contact you, discreetly." "Contact me? About what?" Ethan asked, his suspicion deepening. Barlow's expression softened slightly. "As I mentioned, we're here on behalf of the Parker family. They've asked us to personally extend their gratitude for your assistance to Miss Lydia Parker a few nights ago. They understand you went out of your way to help her when she was stranded, and they would like to show their appreciation." At that, Cole, the younger man, stepped forward, holding a small envelope in his hand. "The Parkers are a very private family, Mr. Williams," he explained, his voice calm but purposeful, "and they value acts of integrity. They believe in rewarding kindness when they see it." Ethan looked from one man to the other, his mind racing as he tried to make sense of the situation. It seemed unusual, almost excessive, that a simple act of helping someone change a tire would attract the attention of a powerful family. He hesitated, glancing down at the envelope in Cole's hand. "And what exactly is this reward you're talking about?" Ethan asked, feeling a cautious curiosity mix with his wariness. Barlow smiled faintly, his tone as smooth as ever. "Inside this envelope, you'll find a check. It's a gesture of appreciation from the Parker family, a way to recognize the kindness you showed to Miss Parker that night." Cole added, "The family values discretion, of course, which is why we haven't approached you directly until now. They're willing to offer you a substantial sum, with no strings attached. All they ask in return is your confidentiality." The word confidentiality sent a ripple of doubt through Ethan. He had seen enough of the world to know that nothing truly came without strings, and this reward, generous as it might be, seemed too extravagant for something so small. He looked at the envelope, but made no move to take it. "I appreciate the offer, really," Ethan said, his voice firm, "but I'm not sure I understand why a simple act of kindness deserves this attention. I don't need any reward for doing what felt right." Cole raised an eyebrow, a hint of surprise flashing across his face. "Mr. Williams, you're turning down the offer?" Ethan nodded, crossing his arms again. "Yes, I am. I don't want to sound ungrateful, but I don't need money or favors for helping someone in need. It's just who I am." Barlow and Cole exchanged a glance. For the first time, a hint of tension flickered between them, and Cole's demeanor turned slightly colder. "Perhaps you misunderstand, Mr. Williams," Cole said, his tone hardening. "This isn't just a reward. It's a gesture of goodwill. Refusing it might complicate things." Ethan felt his jaw tighten at the implied threat. "Are you saying that I have no choice?" Barlow quickly interjected, his voice calm and steady. No, Mr. Williams. There's no obligation. The Parker family would never force anything upon you. However, they rarely make offers like this, and they find that kindness and generosity deserve recognition. They were simply hoping you'd accept their gratitude." Ethan took a deep breath, his gaze never leaving the two men. He couldn't deny the sense of unease building within him. The offer, while outwardly generous, felt like it came with hidden expectations. He had no desire to entangle himself with the affairs of a wealthy family he knew nothing about. "I appreciate the offer, Mr. Barlow, Mr. Cole," he said, his tone polite but resolute. "But I'm going to have to decline. Please thank the Parker family for their generosity, but I'm happy with my life as it is." For a moment, there was silence as both men studied Ethan, their expressions unreadable. Finally, Barlow inclined his head, offering a slight nod of respect. "Very well, Mr. Williams," Barlow said, his voice laced with a tone of finality. "If that is truly your decision, we will respect it." Cole, however, looked less than pleased. His sharp gaze lingered on Ethan a moment longer before he took a step back, slipping the envelope into his pocket with a crisp movement. "We understand," Cole said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "But know that the Parker family does not make such offers lightly, Mr. Williams. Once refused, such an offer is unlikely to be extended again." Ethan remained firm, standing his ground. He wasn't about to let them intimidate him. "I understand. Thank you for coming out here to speak with me directly." Barlow gave him one last assessing look before he gestured for Cole to return to the sedan. "Very well, Mr. Williams. Should you ever change your mind, feel free to reach out. But rest assured, we will not intrude on your life further." With that, the two men turned and returned to the sedan, moving with the same calm efficiency that they had shown upon their arrival. Ethan watched as they got into the car, feeling a mix of relief and lingering uncertainty as the sleek vehicle pulled away from the curb and disappeared down the road. For a few minutes, Ethan remained rooted to the spot, staring after the sedan and the familiar black SUV as they vanished from view. The encounter had left him unsettled, stirring a range of emotions he couldn't easily explain. Gratitude, suspicion, and a faint undercurrent of unease swirled within him. As he returned to his house, Ethan thought about the strange circumstances surrounding his act of kindness toward Lydia Parker. Why had his simple gesture attracted such attention? And why did the Parker family insist on rewarding him in such a way? The encounter weighed heavily on his mind as he went about his day, replaying the conversation over and over, searching for clues. Part of him regretted refusing the offer, wondering if it would have been easier to simply accept and move on. But a larger part of him knew that his decision was right. Ethan valued his independence and his peace of mind. Whatever secrets the Parker family held, he wanted no part of them. He had lived his life by principles of integrity and kindness, and he intended to keep it that way. As the evening approached, Ethan felt a strange sense of closure, as if he had crossed an invisible threshold. Though he didn't know what lay ahead, he was certain of one thing. He would face whatever came his way with the same resolve and integrity that had guided him through life so far. A few days after the strange visit from James Barlow and Mr. Cole, Ethan was trying his best to return to normalcy. The black SUV hadn't reappeared, and his life had settled back into its quiet routine. He was hopeful that, with his polite refusal, he had closed the door on whatever interest the Parker family had in him. But deep down, he couldn't shake the feeling that he hadn't seen the last of them. One evening, As Ethan was unwinding on his front porch with a mug of tea, he noticed a car pulling up at the edge of his driveway. His heart skipped a beat when he saw who stepped out. It was Lydia Parker, the woman he'd helped on the roadside that fateful night. She was dressed in a casual sweater and jeans this time, her hair tied back in a ponytail, her face holding a serious expression. "Lydia?" Ethan said, setting his mug down and standing up, surprised to see her again. "What brings you here?" She offered him a nervous smile, looking around as though checking for something. "It's actually Megan Parker," she corrected. "I, didn't use my real name that night." Ethan felt a pang of surprise. "Megan, then? I didn't expect to see you again, especially after everything that's happened." Megan took a breath, clearly choosing her words carefully. "I know. I didn't want to drag you into this, Ethan, and I'm really sorry that my family, that they've been bothering you. But after I heard about their visit, I thought you deserved to know the truth." Her voice was edged with tension, and Ethan gestured for her to sit beside him on the porch. "You're not exactly easing my worries," he admitted with a small, forced chuckle, trying to keep the mood light. Megan sat down, looking at him with an intensity that quickly erased any attempts at humor. "Ethan, the Parker family isn't just wealthy. They're powerful, and that power has brought them a lot of enemies. Enemies who wouldn't hesitate to use any means necessary to get to them. I didn't tell you this before, but the night you found me, I was actually running away." Ethan frowned, a chill creeping down his spine. Running away from what? Or who? She glanced away, her eyes distant. "My family is tangled up in things that most people in Willow Ridge would never have to worry about. They've made powerful connections, and some of those connections have gone sour. A few weeks ago, I found myself being watched, followed. I didn't know who was behind it, but I had a feeling it wasn't my family, at least not directly. I was scared, and I knew I needed to get away." Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness, understanding now that the fear he'd sensed in her that night had been all too real. "Why didn't you go to the police?" he asked gently. Megan shook her head. "You don't understand. People like my family don't always operate within the law, and the people they're connected to certainly don't. The police can't, or won't, protect me from the kind of people who are after us. I was trying to lay low, hoping that if I distanced myself, they'd lose interest." Ethan listened, absorbing the gravity of her words. "So you changed your name, went somewhere remote, and hoped they'd lose track of you?" She nodded. "Exactly. I thought that if I kept a low profile, I could escape their reach. But that night, when you helped me, I guess I left enough of a trail that my family could find me again. I suppose I should have expected it. They always do." Ethan was silent, letting the pieces fall into place. "And that's why they came to me," he said, realization dawning on him. "They knew I'd helped you, so they thought I might know something or be part of all this somehow." "Yes," she said, regret filling her voice. "They probably wanted to either reward you to keep you quiet or figure out if you had any other connection to my disappearance. They're relentless, Ethan, and they'll use any means necessary to ensure I'm safe, even if that means crossing lines." Ethan shook his head, feeling a mixture of frustration and confusion. "Why tell me this now? What difference does it make if I've already refused their offer?" Megan hesitated, looking away for a moment before meeting his eyes. "Because I'm worried they're not going to give up. Once they set their sights on someone, especially someone they think might have information or value to them, they rarely let go. I wanted you to know the kind of people you're dealing with, to give you a warning." Ethan felt a growing unease, a sense that he was on the edge of something much larger and more dangerous than he could handle alone. "Megan, why didn't you just tell them the truth? Tell them I was just a guy who stopped to help you with a flat tire?" She gave a small, bitter laugh. "That's the thing about people like my family. Once they've gotten involved in something, they see strings everywhere. They don't believe in coincidences. They think everything is part of some larger plan. So if they don't get what they want, they create their own version of the truth. In this case, that could mean pulling you deeper into a web of influence that you never asked for." Her words hung heavily in the air between them, each one adding to the weight of Ethan's apprehension. He wanted to say something, to reassure her that everything would be fine, but the reality was sinking in. She was right. This wasn't the kind of situation he could simply walk away from. Megan's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his arm. Listen, Ethan, I don't know what they might try next, but I know this much. You still have a choice. You can decide to keep your distance, to go on with your life as you always have. Or you could accept their offer and get pulled further in. But if you do that, just know that things may never be the same for you. Her warning was clear, each word laced with urgency. What do you mean, never the same? Ethan asked, a hint of defiance in his voice. They have a way of weaving people into their world, Ethan, she replied, her tone somber. Once they get involved, they make it hard to stay out. They might help you financially, connect you with powerful people, or offer you opportunities that seem impossible to refuse. But in exchange, they'd expect your loyalty, your silence, maybe even favors down the line. It may start small, but eventually, they would own a piece of you. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. He hadn't considered the extent of the consequences when he had refused the offer from the Parker family. All he had wanted was a simple life, untouched by power plays and hidden agendas. Now, he felt as if he were teetering on the edge of a world that demanded everything he had spent his life trying to avoid. Megan took a deep breath, her expression softening. Look, I didn't come here to scare you, Ethan, but I owed it to you to be honest. You didn't ask to be part of this, and I regret that my family brought this to your doorstep. But if there's one thing I can tell you, it's this: protect your freedom. Don't let them pull you in. They'll make it seem like they're doing you a favor, but at the end of the day, you'll find yourself bound to them in ways you can't escape. Ethan nodded, a mixture of gratitude and fear swirling within him. Thank you for telling me the truth, Megan. I needed to hear it. She gave him a small, sad smile. You deserve to know, and if I can, I'll do my best to keep them from interfering with your life. But please, if they reach out again, be cautious. You're a good man, Ethan. Don't let them take that from you. With that, Megan stood, giving him one last look before turning and walking back to her car. As she drove away, Ethan felt an overwhelming sense of resolve settle within him. He knew now what he had to do. He would protect his life, his independence, and everything he held dear. The Parker family might have power, but they didn't have control over his choices. Yet, as the evening darkened, he couldn't ignore the lingering feeling that his life was about to change in ways he could never imagine. In the days following Megan's visit, Ethan found himself at a crossroads, weighed down by the burden of a choice that would affect not only his life, but potentially the entire town of Willow Ridge. Megan's warning had struck him deeply, and he knew that refusing the Parker family might protect his peace, but at what cost? The more he thought about it, the more he saw an opportunity, not for himself, but for his community. Willow Ridge was a quiet town, beautiful in its simplicity but struggling with many unspoken challenges. The old community center where Ethan worked was more than just a job to him. It was a lifeline for the town. People came there for small events, for resources, and for help with everyday challenges. Ethan began to wonder, what if he could use the Parker family's resources to create something lasting, something that could benefit everyone in Willow Ridge? The next morning, he made a decision. If the Parker family was serious about their offer, he would accept it, but only on his terms. Resolute, Ethan pulled out the sleek business card James Barlow had left and dialed the number. It rang only once before someone answered. Mr. Williams, Barlow's voice greeted him smoothly, as if he had been expecting the call. It's good to hear from you. Mr. Barlow, Ethan replied, keeping his tone steady. I've been thinking about your family's offer, and I'd like to discuss it further. But before I agree to anything, I have conditions. There was a brief silence on the other end, and Ethan imagined Barlow's calculated expression. Finally, the man replied, Of course. The Parker family values cooperation and respects a straightforward approach. Shall we arrange a meeting? A few hours later, Barlow and Cole arrived at Ethan's modest home, stepping out of the sleek sedan with their usual air of professionalism. This time, however, Ethan felt less intimidated. He led them to his small living room, where they sat across from him, waiting expectantly. Ethan took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. I've decided that I'm willing to accept your family's offer, but I'm not interested in money for myself. Instead, I'd like the funds to be invested in Willow Ridge." Barlow's eyebrows lifted slightly, but his expression remained composed. "Go on." "Willow Ridge is a close-knit town," Ethan began, his voice steady. "But it's also a town that's struggling. Our community center is in desperate need of repairs. We don't have a lot of resources here. No after-school programs, no affordable support for families. The young people who grow up here usually end up leaving for better opportunities. I want to change that." He paused, making sure they understood his seriousness before continuing. "What I'm proposing is an investment in Willow Ridge. I want to build a new community center, one that could offer tutoring, job training, and even scholarships for kids who can't afford college. I want this center to be a place where people feel supported, where they can learn, grow, and build better lives. If your family agrees to this, then I'll accept your offer." Cole glanced at Barlow, his expression unreadable, but Barlow leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "So, you're asking for an investment in your community rather than a personal reward?" Ethan nodded. "Exactly. This isn't about me. I just want to make Willow Ridge a better place for everyone who lives here." Barlow folded his hands thoughtfully. "Mr. Williams, I must say, your proposition is unexpected. The Parker family rarely encounters individuals who would turn down a financial reward for something so selfless." "Well," Ethan replied, a small smile forming on his lips, "I didn't help Megan because I wanted money. I helped because it was the right thing to do. And if you're serious about rewarding kindness, then this is how I want it done." The two men exchanged a silent look, and Barlow finally nodded. "I believe we can arrange something that aligns with your vision, Mr. Williams. The Parker family has supported community initiatives in the past, and this sounds like a project they would be willing to fund. However, there will need to be certain terms of agreement to ensure transparency and proper use of the funds." Ethan nodded. "I expected that. As long as the terms are fair, I'm open to them." Cole spoke up for the first time, his tone now softened with a touch of respect. "It's rare to meet someone who genuinely puts others before themselves, Mr. Williams. We'll present your proposal to the family, and I'm confident they'll see the merit in it. In fact, I believe they'll be impressed." Within a few days, Ethan received confirmation that the Parker family had accepted his proposal. Not only were they willing to fund the construction of a new community center, but they had also approved a scholarship fund dedicated to helping local students pursue higher education. The agreement included Ethan as the main overseer of the project, with a team of architects, planners, and educational consultants at his disposal. Soon, Willow Ridge was buzzing with activity. The townspeople were thrilled, and Ethan could see the excitement and hope in their faces as they learned of the plans for the new community center. The Parker family's representatives stayed in the background, discreetly overseeing the project but leaving most of the public credit to Ethan. After all, this was his vision, and he was the one who had rallied the town around it. Every day, Ethan was on site, working closely with the construction team, coordinating meetings, and speaking with locals to make sure their needs were being heard. The community's input became central to the center's design. There would be classrooms for after-school tutoring, a job training area for young adults, and even a family counseling space. The new community center would serve every age group, providing a place where people could gather, learn, and feel supported. The scholarship fund was also a vital part of the project. Many families in Willow Ridge couldn't afford college tuition, and this fund would change that. The idea of giving young people the opportunity to pursue their dreams, to go to college or vocational schools, made Ethan proud in a way he had never felt before. As the weeks turned into months, the structure of the new center began to take shape, standing tall as a testament to Ethan's vision and determination. The townspeople often stopped by the site to chat with Ethan, offering words of encouragement or sharing stories of how much the center would mean to them and their families. One afternoon, Megan Parker returned to Willow Ridge. She hadn't expected to be a part of the project, but when she heard what Ethan was doing, she wanted to witness the impact for herself. She found him at the construction site, surrounded by a group of volunteers, all working with a shared sense of purpose and excitement. "Ethan," she called out, approaching with a look of admiration, "this is incredible. I had no idea you'd turn my family's offer into something like this." He smiled warmly, stepping away from the volunteers to greet her. "This is what Willow Ridge needs, Megan. This town has been good to me, and I want to give back. None of this would have been possible without your family's help, though." Megan shook her head, a hint of awe in her expression. "I've never seen someone refuse a personal reward to help others like this. It's inspiring. You've turned what could have been a private gain into something that will impact generations." Ethan shrugged, feeling slightly embarrassed by the praise. It just felt like the right thing to do. "I've always believed that if you have the means to make a difference, you should." As they stood together, watching the community center rise, Megan felt a sense of gratitude she hadn't expected. Ethan's choice to invest in his town had not only changed Willow Ridge, but it had also given her a sense of hope and pride in her family's influence. By the time the project was completed, the center had become a symbol of resilience and unity for Willow Ridge. Children now had a safe space to learn, parents found support, and young people could dream bigger. The scholarship fund had already been awarded to several students, and their stories inspired others in town to believe that their futures held new possibilities. When the grand opening finally arrived, the townspeople gathered to celebrate, the atmosphere filled with laughter and cheer. Standing at the podium, Ethan looked out at the faces of his friends, neighbors, and new students, feeling a deep sense of fulfillment. "Thank you for being here today," he began, his voice filled with pride and humility. "This center is more than a building. It's a promise that Willow Ridge will always be a place where people help each other, where everyone has the chance to build a better life. This is for all of you." The crowd erupted in applause, their faces glowing with gratitude and admiration. And as he stepped down, Ethan felt a quiet peace. He had made the right choice, and he had done it on his own terms. With the support of his community, he had transformed an offer into a legacy that would endure for generations. The transformation of Willow Ridge was nothing short of remarkable. What had once been a modest town with few resources was now becoming a hub of opportunity and hope, all centered around the newly built community center. Every day, as Ethan walked through the bustling hallways, he could hardly believe the changes he was witnessing. Families were pouring in, children laughed and learned together, and adults of all ages found support they had long gone without. The center quickly became a refuge for families struggling to make ends meet. The doors were open to everyone, and the programs were designed to provide something for all. In one section of the building, rooms were filled with parents attending workshops on job skills and budgeting. Volunteers and local experts, who had been inspired by Ethan's mission, came to teach and guide those looking to improve their lives. In the afternoons, the center was full of children, their faces lit up with excitement and wonder. The tutoring rooms were buzzing with students tackling homework, practicing reading, and sharpening their math skills. A small library, stocked with books that had been donated by community members, gave children a place to discover worlds far beyond their small town. For many of these kids, the community center became a second home, a place where they could dream big and feel supported. Ethan had overseen every step of the project with tireless dedication. He had become a familiar, comforting presence, always ready to lend a hand or listen to someone's story. His compassion and unwavering dedication resonated with everyone who came through the center's doors. Though he had never sought the role of a leader, he had naturally become one. A figure of respect and kindness, someone the townspeople looked to for guidance. But it wasn't just the children and struggling families who benefited. One of the center's most significant contributions was its healthcare program, a much-needed resource in Willow Ridge. With funds from the Parker family and partnerships with local clinics, Ethan had arranged for a small health facility within the center. Here, volunteer doctors and nurses provided basic healthcare services, from checkups to vaccinations. For many families, it was the first time they had regular access to healthcare, and the impact was profound. One day, as Ethan was walking through the center, he spotted a young mother, Emily, with her toddler, Ben. She was someone he had gotten to know well. Her husband worked long hours, and they had been struggling to keep up with medical bills. "Hey, Emily," Ethan greeted her, crouching down to wave at little Ben. "How's everything going?" Emily smiled, relief in her eyes. "We're doing great, Ethan. Thanks to the center, Ben just got his vaccinations, and I feel like I can finally breathe easier. This place, it's changed everything for us." Ethan felt a warm satisfaction, knowing that the center was accomplishing exactly what he'd hoped. "That's what it's here for," he replied, giving her a reassuring nod. As the months went by, Ethan continued to oversee every detail of the center's growth. He held regular meetings with the staff and volunteers, making sure everyone's concerns and ideas were heard. His leadership style was collaborative, always emphasizing respect and compassion. He believed that for the center to thrive, it needed to be a place where everyone felt valued. The success of the center spread through Willow Ridge like wildfire, attracting attention from nearby towns. It wasn't long before people from outside the community began stopping by, curious to see what Ethan and his team had built. Some came to learn from the programs, others offered to volunteer, and a few came simply to witness the impact firsthand. The ripple effects of Ethan's work were reaching far beyond Willow Ridge. One afternoon, as Ethan was finishing up a meeting with the center's staff, Megan Parker arrived for a visit. She had been following the progress of the center from a distance, and each time she returned, she was amazed by the impact it had on the town. "Ethan," she greeted him warmly, a proud smile on her face. "I've been hearing incredible things about the center. It's inspiring to see what you've done here." He shook her hand, his smile genuine. "Thank you, Megan. It's been a journey, but seeing the difference it's making, well, it's worth every moment." They walked through the center together, and Megan marveled at the sheer variety of people benefiting from it. In one room, a group of teenagers was discussing career goals with a mentor. Down the hall, a young father was learning budgeting techniques in a financial workshop. Everywhere they looked, lives were being changed. As they stood near the entrance, Megan turned to Ethan. "You've not only improved this town, you've changed people's lives. This center has become a model of what a community can do when people come together." Ethan nodded, but he remained humble. "I couldn't have done any of this alone. The people of Willow Ridge wanted this just as much as I did. They've put in the work, volunteered their time, and believed in what this center could become." Megan smiled, understanding his modesty. "Still, Ethan, none of this would have happened without your leadership. You've inspired people to believe in something bigger than themselves." As they continued their tour, Ethan's mind drifted back to the day he had first proposed the center. He remembered the uncertainty, the fear that maybe he had taken on more than he could handle. But looking at it now, he realized that his vision had been realized in ways he never could have predicted. By now, the center was more than just a building. It was a thriving ecosystem of hope and opportunity. Local business owners had even started donating supplies and offering job training sessions. Some of the high school students, many of whom had never considered college, were applying for scholarships funded through the center. The new resources and community support had given them a reason to dream bigger. Every evening, as Ethan walked through the quiet, empty halls of the center after everyone had left, he felt a profound sense of purpose. He had found a calling that went beyond a simple act of kindness. It was a legacy, one that would continue to grow and impact lives long after he was gone. But his work was far from finished. Seeing the impact the center had made inspired him to think even bigger. He began reaching out to other towns, offering to share the model they had built in Willow Ridge. Some nearby communities were facing similar challenges, and Ethan felt it was only right to pass on what he had learned. It was his way of extending the center's reach, to spread the hope that had transformed his own town. One evening, Ethan sat with a small group of community members in the center's meeting room, discussing new initiatives. They were brainstorming ideas, from starting a local farmers market to organizing mental health support groups. The ideas were endless, and Ethan was grateful to see how the center had become a place where everyone felt empowered to make a difference. "You know, Ethan," said Ryan, one of his oldest friends and now a volunteer at the center, "this place has done more than any of us ever expected. You've built something that's not just helping people, it's giving them pride in their town again." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of his friend's words. "That was always the goal, Ryan. It's all about giving people a place where they feel they belong, a place where they know they're valued." As he spoke, he realized that he had found his own sense of belonging in the process. The community center had become his life's work, and every success, every smiling face, reminded him of the power of compassion and persistence. The center had brought Willow Ridge back to life, And as Ethan looked toward the future, he knew that he would continue to lead with integrity and kindness. His journey had started with a single act of helping a stranger on the road, but it had blossomed into something much greater than he ever could have dreamed. With the center thriving, Ethan looked forward to each new day, ready to face any challenges that came his way, knowing that together, he and the people of Willow Ridge could accomplish anything. Months after the grand opening of the Willow Ridge Community Center, Ethan sat in his small office at the back of the center, surrounded by plans, proposals, and thank you letters from families and students. Life in Willow Ridge had been transformed, and the impact of the center was more than he could have ever dreamed. Every day, he saw lives change, and people grow stronger and more resilient. It was everything he had hoped for and more. One afternoon, he received a call from James Barlow, the man who had initially approached him on behalf of the Parker family. Ethan hadn't heard from Barlow in some time, and the call surprised him. "Mr. Williams," Barlow greeted him, his voice warm. "I hope you're well." The Parker family has been following the success of the Willow Ridge Community Center closely. They're very pleased with how everything has turned out. Ethan thanked him, his tone humble, though he felt a surge of pride. "I'm grateful for their support, Mr. Barlow. None of this would have been possible without it." "There's more to discuss," Barlow replied. "The family is very impressed with your work, Ethan, and they're interested in something that could take this success even further." Ethan felt a slight tension in his chest as he considered what this might mean. What are they thinking? "Well," Barlow continued, "they believe the Willow Ridge model could benefit other communities across the state. We've been exploring the possibility of expanding the center's approach, creating similar community hubs elsewhere, especially in towns like Willow Ridge that lack resources." Ethan sat back in his chair, letting the idea sink in. Expanding the model statewide could bring unimaginable benefits to countless other communities. But he also knew that large-scale projects often came with compromises. He wanted to ensure that the core values of the center, kindness, integrity, and community-focused support, remained intact. "That's a big undertaking," Ethan finally replied. "It's an incredible opportunity, but only if it stays true to what we've built here. The center isn't about status or profit. It's about creating a place where people feel supported and connected." "I understand, and so does the family," Barlow assured him. "They've seen how much this center has meant to Willow Ridge. They want to ensure that any expansion follows your lead." Ethan paused, absorbing Barlow's words. This could be the chance to extend the impact he'd seen in Willow Ridge to countless other communities, bringing hope and support to people who needed it most. But he had to be sure the expansion would uphold the center's mission. "Then I'm willing to consider it," he replied. "But I'll need to be involved in the process, at least in a guiding role. I want to oversee how each center is set up and ensure that local leaders are chosen to carry out the work in ways that meet the unique needs of each community." Barlow agreed, impressed by Ethan's dedication. "I'll pass along your conditions to the Parker family. I think they'll be more than willing to work within your vision." After the call ended, Ethan sat in his office, lost in thought. The idea of expanding was both thrilling and daunting, but he knew that if it were done right, it could create ripples of change far beyond anything he had imagined. As word of the potential expansion spread, people from all over began reaching out to Ethan for advice and insight. Journalists visited Willow Ridge to document the story, and Ethan found himself being recognized for his leadership and kindness. The quiet, modest man who had once lived anonymously in his small town was now regarded as a symbol of resilience, generosity, and integrity. Despite the attention, Ethan remained grounded. He still spent his days at the center, working alongside staff and volunteers, mentoring kids, and offering a listening ear to anyone who needed it. To him, the true reward wasn't the recognition or the prospect of expansion. It was the daily interactions, the smiles, the small victories he witnessed each day. As the expansion plans moved forward, Ethan insisted on a personal touch for every center. He traveled to towns across the state, meeting with local leaders, listening to their concerns, and sharing the story of Willow Ridge's journey. Each time he told the story, he emphasized that it had all begun with a single act of kindness, a moment on a dark road when he had stopped to help a stranger. One day, as he visited a new center in the early stages of development, Ethan was approached by a young woman who had traveled from out of town to meet him. She introduced herself as Laura and explained that her family had been struggling for years. They lived in a town that was planning to open a center inspired by Willow Ridge, and she wanted to thank him personally. "Mr. Williams," Laura said, her voice full of emotion, "I don't know if you realize how much this will mean to families like mine. For years, we've felt overlooked, forgotten. But knowing that a place like this will open in our town, it's given us hope." Her words touched Ethan deeply, and he responded with the same humility and sincerity that had always guided him. "I'm glad to hear that, Laura. That's exactly what these centers are meant to do, to remind people that they're not alone, that there are people who care." As he returned to Willow Ridge that evening, he reflected on how one small decision, to help someone in need, had grown into something so profound. He had never imagined that such a simple act could lead to a movement that would spread across the state, giving people hope and resources they had once thought were out of reach. In the following months, several new centers opened, each modeled after the original in Willow Ridge. Each center adapted to the needs of its community, and Ethan stayed in touch with the local leaders, offering guidance and support from afar. The network grew, connecting towns across the state, each community center representing the same spirit of compassion and integrity. Ethan had become a symbol, yes, but he had also become a mentor and an advocate for those who had been overlooked. In a world that often focused on ambition and profit, Ethan had shown that real change came from empathy, humility, and a willingness to help. On the one-year anniversary of the Willow Ridge Community Center, the town held a celebration. Families, students, and supporters gathered in the center's main hall, sharing stories of how their lives had changed. As Ethan took the stage to speak, he looked out over the crowd, his heart swelling with gratitude and pride. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice steady. "This community center stands because of you. It's a testament to what people can achieve when they come together, when they believe in something bigger than themselves." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the room, landing on familiar faces he had come to know and cherish. This all started with a small act of kindness. And I think that's what I've learned most from this journey, that kindness, no matter how small, has the power to create waves of change. It's not about grand gestures or big rewards. It's about caring enough to make a difference, even when no one is watching. The room filled with applause, people smiling and nodding, some wiping tears from their eyes. Ethan stepped back from the podium, feeling a deep peace settle within him. He had found his purpose, his legacy, not in wealth or fame, but in the lives he had touched. As he walked through the crowd afterward, people approached him with words of gratitude, sharing stories of how the center had changed their lives. But Ethan knew that the real impact wasn't his alone. It was a collective effort, a community coming together in a spirit of unity and compassion. The journey that had begun with a single act of kindness had blossomed into a legacy that would live on long after Ethan. And as he looked around, he knew that this was the real reward. A community united, lives transformed, and the knowledge that his simple decision to help one person had become a force for good that would ripple outward, touching lives in ways he could never fully see.